By the time the sky over Tokyo lightened from black to washed out indigo, Akira's monitors were still the brightest things in his apartment. He hadn't intended to stay up this long. The clock in the corner of the screen read 6:01 a.m. The city outside was in that vague pre-commute hum, distant traffic, the occasional scooter, the muffled rattle of pipes as someone in the building turned on a shower. His own room, by contrast, sounded like it always did at this hour. Fan, fridge, computer fans, the soft, familiar noise floor of his life. On his left monitor, the spectrogram of Echo's final 30 seconds waited where he'd left it. On the right, the bare-bones forum thread sat open, its thin column of text now dense with names and timestamps. At the top of his notes pane, he typed a new label an hour ago. Breath sample source Glass Harbor. He clicked the file again. The segment was short, less than 3 seconds, around 0123. In waveform view, it looked deceptively simple. A primary inhale curve with a second, deeper contour tucked underneath. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cinematic, it was small. Small didn't mean unimportant. He switched to the offset map view, his own custom overlay tool. The grid came back up. Vertical axis for positional drift, horizontal for time. Colored paths tracked the micro-movements he'd mapped from Echo's avatar across her last minute. Head tilt, shoulder shift, bow onset, subtle breathing motion. He'd run this map twice already tonight. Once with the baseline audio, once with the first pass of the double breath in isolation. Both times the lines had behaved. Now he fed in Glass Harbor's cleaner sample. He aligned the primary inhale with the bow onset, set the hair drop marker, and the blackout marker. Then he pulled the second contour, the deeper breath, into the model and let the tool recalibrate. For a second, nothing changed. Then the lines moved. The curve that should have tracked Echo's torso stayed roughly where he expected, within the narrow band of her seated posture, consistent with all the reference streams he'd cataloged. The new path, tied to the deeper breath, didn't sit in the same lane. It arced behind the chair. Akira narrowed his eyes and zoomed in. His cursor followed the new line frame by frame. It started slightly left of Echo's central axis, rose as if someone straightened, then cut across the grid in a diagonal that put it behind her known shoulder position. It didn't match her rig. It didn't match her body. He checked the calibration again, just to be certain he hadn't misaligned something stupid. Same result. He let the map sit on the screen, lines frozen mid-drift. His tea had gone cold an hour ago, but he took a sip anyway, mostly out of habit. Not her. On the right monitor, the reply box blinked empty. He wasn't a fan of big declarations. He preferred numbers, screenshots, diagrams. But the thread had been circling this for 2 days now, breaths, shadows, hair drops, scrapes, without anyone pinning down what the data implied. He tapped his fingers once against the desk and started typing. Sundown. Offset map rerun with new breath sample from Glass Harbor. Positional drift inconsistent with her sitting posture. Lines crossed behind her. Not her. He read it once, then hit post. His handle appeared in the thread with the new entry. For a moment, the white page felt very, very quiet. He didn't wait for reactions. Instead, he pulled the offset map into a separate window and overlaid Echo's known motion profile, the one he'd built from older streams. Her seated posture had a defined range, small head dips, minor shoulder adjustments, the occasional lean toward the mic. Nothing in that archive ever put her center of motion where this new path went. He toggled the overlay off and on. Same mismatch. He saved the comparison in a new file. Then he finally leaned back in his chair, feeling the stiff protest of his lower back. The room smelled faintly of old tea and electronics, the scent of every all-nighter he'd ever pulled. On the right monitor, the thread updated. In Prague, evening had settled hours ago. Northbridge's apartment was quiet, but not dark. She preferred pools of focused light to general brightness. One lamp over the dining table, another at her desk, the glow from her monitors. Everything else was just shadow and the soft delineation of furniture. She told herself she would stop for the night after finishing one more pass on a client system audit. Instead, she was staring at a grid she'd built for a stranger's live stream. On her main screen, a spreadsheet spanned almost the entire width, columns labeled in precise, tidy text. Time, UTC, time, stream, event, source, confidence, notes. Row after row of entries clustered around one section at 012319. Breath spike, bow onset, hair physics dip, lantern flicker, blackout, shadow under desk, scrape, now irregular double breath. She rubbed at the bridge of her nose with the heel of her hand and pushed her glasses a fraction higher. On the smaller screen to her left, the thread was open, scrolled to the bottom. She watched as Sundown's new post appeared. Offset map rerun. Lines crossed behind her chair. Not her. She exhaled slowly. Not her. It had been there, unspoken in their data for a day now, but seeing it written down, cleanly without embellishment, shifted something. She alt-tabbed back to her own tools. Her alignment program showed a simplified version of what Sundown described, a vector map with arrows representing motion. She'd been working on the bow to blackout sequence before she'd even read his message, trying to separate Echo's known animation patterns from whatever else had crept in. The first pass had been messy. This one was better. She set the 0 point at the bow onset. She layered her model of Echo's typical bow curve on the top as a ghost template, then laid the actual motion data over it. They didn't match cleanly. There was an extra deviation at the onset, a sharper, narrower bend than the rig normally produced, a little hitch, a little pull. She isolated Echo's known pattern and subtracted it out. The residual vector that remained should have vanished into noise, but it didn't. Instead, it formed a coherent directional line, angled from left to right, rising slightly, then dropping toward the blackout frame, not the path of her avatar bowing. Something else moving in the room. She checked the math again, reran the alignment with a different reference frame, same residual. On the thread, the cursor blinked in the reply box. Her fingers hovered for only a second before she typed. Confirming, rechecking bow to blackout alignment, subtracting her known animation patterns, residual motion remaining, doesn't belong to Echo. She posted it, then took her hands off the keyboard deliberately. The responses would come, they always did, but this part, the moment of writing down a conclusion she'd been resisting, required its own small pause. She stood, walked the 6 steps to her kitchen, and poured herself another small glass of water. The pipes hummed. Somewhere in the building, someone shut a door too hard. The sound traveled through the old walls and died in the quiet. When she sat back down, another line had appeared. Sundown stared at the thread as Northbridge's message joined his. Residual motion doesn't belong to Echo. He expected more hedging from her, conditional phrasing, a buffer of uncertainty. Instead, her wording matched his own mood, minimal, factual, no adjectives. He toggled to his offset map again. The new path behind the chair, tied to Glass Harbor's deeper breath contour, was still there, cutting through space Echo's model never occupied. He watched the cursor blink in the reply box, then let the words come as simply as he could. Posting preliminary result, there was someone behind her chair. He added quotations deliberately, not a theory, not a dramatization, a line drawn between points. He hit post, then removed his hands, pressing his palms flat on his thighs for a moment. The sensation of the keyboard lingered in his fingertips. The phrase looked stark on the page. There was someone behind her chair. He didn't like sentences that large, but small ones had run out of room. He leaned back until his chair clicked softly at the limit of his tilt. The ceiling above him showed a faint water stain in the corner, a reminder of a leak from last winter. His mind flicked briefly, irrationally, to the idea of someone standing behind his own chair. He dismissed it. He turned the volume on his headphones down to 0 and slipped them back on anyway. Pressure on his ears, familiar and grounding. On the other side of the world, the thread ticked forward again. In Prague, Northbridge watched the words appear. There was someone behind her chair. She let her eyes rest on the sentence for a long beat, feeling the weight of it. Not because the idea itself was new, most of them had danced around it in their private thoughts, but because this was the first time anyone had allowed the data to say it out loud. She didn't type immediately. Instead, she brought up a different view, her scrape to blackout alignment model. Earlier, she'd mapped the faint scrape sound Ray and Bale Crews kept talking about, tying its onset to the vector changes in the motion data and the blackout slope. She added the new variable, the deeper breath contour from Glass Harbor's sample. The graph shifted, recalculating. Scrape vector, breath shift, blackout ramp. She watched as the algorithm tied to treat them as separate events failed and instead merged them into a single smooth arc, one motion pattern. She pulled Echo's known movements out of the equation entirely, subtracting every vector that matched her rig's history. What remained was cleaner than she expected, a single directional path left to right into frame. Her throat tightened, not with fear, but the particular satisfaction and sick certainty of a problem finally resolving into a shape. She clicked back into the thread and began to type. Scrape vector plus breath shift plus blackout slope equals one motion pattern, not hers, this is the second person. She sent it, pushed her chair back an inch, putting a small space between herself and the screen. The apartment was silent. On the thread, the effect was anything but. The next reply came quickly. London fog. Reading both posts, thread is moving quickly. I agree with the conclusion. This isn't Echo alone. Sundown read it without moving his head, only his eyes. Agree. It was a small word that carried more weight than most of the speculation the thread had seen over the past 2 days. London fog didn't sign off on things casually. His earlier posts read like lab notes, not horror stories. If he was willing to state this, the evidence had crossed his internal threshold. Another line appeared. Vale Cruz. Finally, been saying physics didn't add up, someone else was there. Sundown almost smiled despite the hour. Vale Cruz's posts always had a slightly raw edge, equal parts technical insight and impatience at not being believed fast enough. The word finally hung over the line like an exhale. On the spreadsheet in Prague, Northbridge inserted a new column header, second figure initial confirmation. She hadn't written the words yet, but the structure was already making space for them. The thread continued. Meridian line. Updating timeline, creating new column, second figure initial confirmation. Northbridge nodded once, alone in her apartment, as if Meridian line could see her. It was a small, satisfying moment, independent verification that someone else halfway across the world was building the same scaffold she was. In Tokyo, Sundown watched the line appear and felt the map in his head update. It wasn't just his offset tool anymore. It was now a row in someone else's grid. And then, Ray E. Didn't think it was just me, knew something was wrong at 0123. Sundown let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Ray's post always carried something the rest of them lacked. The texture of having actually been there in real time, not just in files and downloads. Reading his line now gave the whole grid another layer, a human timestamp. In Prague, Northbridge highlighted Ray E's message for her own notes. Primary observer, emotional confirmation, she typed in her private document. Then she sat back and looked at the full picture. Breaths, scrapes, shadows, vectors, offsets. Different people, different tools, same conclusion. For the first time since she'd created the forum, the ambiguity she usually lived in had shrunk to almost nothing. Someone was in the room with her, she said aloud, her voice very calm in the quiet apartment. In Tokyo, Sundown removed his headphones entirely and let them dangle from one hand. The spectrogram still glowed on his screen, the breath spike bright against the darker frequencies. The offset map still showed the path cutting behind the chair. It hadn't felt like horror to him, not really. It felt like a system behaving in a way systems shouldn't. Now, finally, the language had caught up. He opened a fresh note file and typed 3 short lines. Second source confirmed. Second figure confirmed. Intruder present during scream, not before or after. He saved it without embellishment. On the thread, the scroll bar inched smaller as more people joined, reading from the top, absorbing the shift in tone. The site itself didn't change. No graphics, no banners, no alerts. Just more text, more timestamps, more handles. But the equilibrium had altered. Before tonight, the possibility of an intruder had been something implied, talked around, hinted at, buried in technical discussion. Now it sat in the open, written in plain language by the 2 people the thread trusted most for clean, unflinching analysis. There was someone behind her chair. This is a second person. The forum was no longer trying to decide whether Echo's final stream had weird vibes or just glitches. It was for the first time certain of one thing: she had not been alone in that room.